Welcome back, folks. We're down in Fort Worth, Texas, having an extraordinary conversation with everyday Americans. And our next guest has an extraordinary story to tell. His name is Walt Heyer, and he's the author of Trans Life Survivor and Articles of Impeachment Against Sex Changes. It's such an honor to have you here today, Walt. You have an amazing story to tell. I think a lot of people haven't heard it. Tell us a little bit about your journey.
Yeah. Well, it started in 1944, so it's a long time ago. I was a curious kid. My grandmother was a seamstress making women's clothing, and she was babysitting me, and I became very interested in what she was doing. I leaned on the sewing machine as a 4-year-old kid, kind of mesmerized by what Grandma was doing, and showed an interest in, cross-dressing. As a 4-year-old, it was curiosity.
Right.
And as a 4-year-old is curious about everything. And so Grandma decided in her wisdom to make me a purple chiffon dress, perfectly matched to my little body. In 1944, put that dress on me and started affirming me and started telling me how cute I was. And therein lies what we call an adverse childhood experience, where you begin to damage a child. This is emotional and psychological abuse. Now, I did not know it was at the time.
It's too little to tell.
It seemed like fun, right? It seemed very benign, but what she was doing was destroying my core identity, the way I saw myself, the way I visualized myself, the way I presented myself. So with that, she decided to keep it a secret for 2.5 years until I became so accustomed to the affirmation of every time I was over there and she would babysit me, I'd be in the purple dress.
Wow.
It's just the way it was.
Yeah.
And so this is the indoctrination that we see going on today. And it's no different today, really. The harm is even greater because there's a lot more people involved in the affirmation process.
That's right.
And now they're giving people hormones and surgery at such a young age. And thankfully, that didn't happen to me at that young age. It happened later. But so, as time went on, my father, after he found out that I was cross-dressing, he became, just horrified about what his mother-in-law had been doing, if you can imagine. And so he began to, in his own way, try to discipline me with a hardwood floor plank, thinking this was the way to man me up. Sort of like a blacksmith would take hot iron and pound it over something and shape it, and he was going to shape me into a man with a hardwood floor plank. That was his best tool. That's all he knew to do. But that wasn't the end of it. He had an adopted brother who was a teenager at the time, and because I was wearing a purple dress, it became family knowledge. He began to sexually molest me. So this is by the time I'm 9 years old, I've been cross-dressed, affirmed, hit with a hardwood floor plank, and sexually molested. It's not the best way to start life.
I'll say so.
So that set within me these things which we now know, because there's been a lot of research about it, called adverse childhood experiences. And so I didn't know it at the time, but I was going through this pattern, and all of a sudden the news came out in the 50s, Christine Jorgensen headline, "The soldier becomes a female." And I thought that was the way I identified. It's like, nobody's talking about this. It's the first thing I'd seen.
That's me.
That's me. That must be what I'm about. So then I began to take in that identity and went through that process. And I was never homosexual. I never had that as an issue. I had this gender confusion that started with a purple dress, hardwood floor plank, and sexual molestation. So I got married, I had children, I was an associate design engineer on the Apollo space missions working on the area of cryogenics. I left that industry and went into the automobile industry and became a top executive for American Auto Motor Company as the national operations manager. But I was struggling with a purple dress, a hardwood floor plank, and sexual molestation had not been dealt with. When we don't deal with things that happen to us, when we have adverse childhood experience, they're going to come back and haunt you at some point.
They carry on, don't they?
And so I had this identity problem all through my life, even during the marriage, and I told her I was struggling. And so while I was with American Honda, I decided that I would go see a gender specialist. And let me just say to anybody listening to this, never go to a gender specialist. They will destroy your life. That's their whole purpose, is to destroy your life. I went to a gender specialist. He said, you have gender dysphoria, and what you need is hormones and surgery. That was in 1981. I went through the protocols in 1982. I got divorced, left my wife. 1983, I had the surgery. and I identified as Laura Jensen, lived that way for 8 years. I started studying psychology at UC Santa Cruz because I'm interested in really getting into what this is about.
Right.
And I realized that people who identify in this way are struggling with either bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, body dysmorphia, depression, some underlying comorbid issue. Nobody's born transgender. In fact, the truth is, this is the truth today, transgenders don't exist. There is no such thing as a transgender. I have a paper here from Superior Court of California, San Mateo, written by the doctor who performed my surgery, had done 5,000 surgeries.
Wow.
Signed and co-signed by the guy who approved me for surgery, saying the only thing that hormones and surgery is capable of doing to anyone is neutering them.
Wow.
Nobody is altered hormonally to the point to where they change genders. The only thing that hormones do is make you look feminine or for a girl look masculine. So what is the real word that we should be using? The real word is we're feminizing boys or men and masculinizing women. We're not changing anybody's gender. No gender in history has ever changed.
That's right.
So it's
not even impossible.
It's not even a gender issue. And so I wrote this book, a cheap plug for my book. This tells about the history of how it got started. And it was started by people who were pedophiles. It wasn't started by people who were trying to help kids. They were started by pedophiles. And then I wrote this book, Trans Life Survivors, that you mentioned.
Right.
This book gives the consequences. These are 30 stories about people whose lives were destroyed.
Talk about the consequences. We only got a few minutes left, but I want to capture the personal consequences to you and the decision when you decide, I'm done with this.
Yeah, well, of course, I lost my career. They threw me out. Income-wise, I've never had a job since October 1983 that I could.
Really?
So I lost over, with my income at the time, if I'd have just gone steady through that, would have been about $2 million in loss. So those are consequences. My kids paid a huge price for my misguided ideas about this whole idea. And of course, I was divorced. Now I'm remarried for 25 years.
Good for you.
We started a ministry that reaches around the world called sexchangeregret.com.
Right.
And people can reach out. I've been working with people now for well over 12 years. The first person I helped actually 25 years ago. So we've learned about adverse childhood experiences. They're called ACEs. We realized that there is a thing called generalized dysphoria. People do not have gender dysphoria. That was a made-up term to have this explosion in 2013 when they changed the terminology in the DSM. Generalized dysphoria is real. Gender dysphoria is not.
For parents and children and others going through this, and policymakers, what's the most important message you want them to take from
The
your
most
experience?
important message is to understand that what we've set up here is we have a social contagion that is indoctrinating kids in school. And this is so troubling to me because I have kids writing me at 10 years old who are caught up in these things in school, and I help the parents get out of it. So policymakers need to understand nobody changes genders. We're feminizing boys, masculinizing girls. Stop using the word gender dysphoria. Stop using the word transgender. Stop saying you're transitioning, and stop using the word gender dysphoria, because I haven't found one person that actually has gender dysphoria. I found that they have generalized dysphoria. So I've written about this, many articles, and so I think we need to own the language. We're using the LGBT language, and we're hurting ourselves by using their terminology. We need to stop doing it.
Own the language, own the narrative. It's one of the great lessons in all of history. That's what happens. Walt Heyer, what an extraordinary experience. Well, thank you for sharing it and helping us learn a lot more about it. Really, what a great conversation.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
Great honor to have you. Folks, we're going to take a quick commercial break. We'll be right back after these messages.